Now, chances are, if you're really just getting started with object-oriented programming and the idea of frameworks, that this looks like it's just added complexity. I mean, it was easy enough just to print the output to the screen. So Symfony works on the foundational idea that there's two parts to an interaction between your application and the server. The first part is the request that comes from the browser or any other device that would send a signal to the server. That's considered the request. So in this script, we're interacting with the browser, and the browser is giving us some data through the query string. First, it's telling us what the URL is that it wants to grab data for. And second, it's passing some parameters through the query string of that URL. So these pieces of data all belong in the request object. Through this request object, we also get access to any global variables, like the get variables, like we were using in the last step, or post variables that you would get from forms, even server variables or session variables. By wrapping access to those variables inside of a class, we all of a sudden get the ability to simulate requests, which is really important for testing out our application. So since we're routing everything that we're grabbing from the server through this request class, we can do things like get, but we can also set up those variables manually by setting them in our script. So again, the request is that first part. It's what we're getting from the browser or from any other device or software that's connecting to the server. And then what the server does is it builds a response to that request. Now, if all you've done is build websites, then almost all of the time your response is going to be some HTML. You're just sending that HTML to the browser to display it. But if you think of your website as an application instead, then there's a lot of other types of responses that you can give to a request to the server. If you take this build a module site, for example, I could create an API to allow people to search the index of videos from any other site. The request that I get will give me some information, like what the URL is of the API that's going to be accessed, as well as what the search phrase is, for example. But then when I return the data, maybe I don't want to return it as HTML, because the client, whoever is accessing my API, might want to display it differently. They might want to wrap their own HTML around it. So instead, what I'll send them might be JSON or XML, something that abstracts the data out so they can take that data and wrap it in whatever markup that they want. So the essence of this response is that it gives us control over that output. We can output it any way we want. We're passing the value of the response directly into the response class here, and then in order to output it to the browser, we use the send method from that response class. Now, if you're like me, you're still trying to figure out what exactly is going on here. And chances are that by the time we work through all of these Symfony examples, you'll get a solid feel for why this is so valuable.